The Rattlesnake brides, legends said they took men whole and left only bones, Wild West horror. The gunshot echoed across the canyon just as Jack Murphy's horse went down. The animal screamed, thrashing in the dust, and Jack rolled clear before the second bullet took his hat clean off his head. He scrambled behind a boulder, heart hammering, scanning the ridge for the shooter. Nothing moved except the heat shimmer rising off the rocks. His horse lay still now, a dark pool spreading beneath its neck. Jack's canteen was still strapped to the saddle. His rifle, too. All he had was his revolver and 5 bullets. The sun was already past noon, beating down on the New Mexico Badlands like a forge hammer. Without water, he would be dead by morning. Another shot rang out, chipping stone near his face. Jack pressed himself flat against the boulder and listened. The echo made it impossible to tell where the shooter was hiding. Could be anywhere on that ridge. Could be more than one. He had been riding the mail route from Silver Creek to Tombstone when the ambush started. 3 days of empty desert, and he had made it through 2.5 before someone decided to take a shot at him. The mail pouch was still on the dead horse. Maybe that was what they wanted. Or maybe they just wanted him dead. Jack wiped sweat from his eyes and checked his gun. 5 shots. He had to make them count. He waited, barely breathing, listening for any sound that might give away the shooter's position. Minutes crawled by. The sun climbed higher. His mouth felt like sandpaper. Then he heard it. Not a gunshot, but something worse. Singing. A woman's voice, high and sweet, drifting down from the rocks above. The melody was strange, almost hypnotic, rising and falling like a lullaby. Jack felt ice run down his spine despite the heat. He had heard stories about this stretch of desert, stories that made old cowboys cross themselves and take the long way around. The singing grew louder, and now he could hear words he did not recognize. Not Spanish. Not Apache. Something older. The air seemed to shimmer more intensely, and Jack realized it was not just the heat. Shapes were moving up on the ridge, tall and fluid, silhouetted against the harsh blue sky. 3 figures appeared, walking down the slope toward him with impossible grace. They wore long dresses that seemed to move on their own, despite the still air. Their hair hung loose and dark, reaching past their waists. Even from a distance, Jack could see they were beautiful, dangerously beautiful. His hand tightened on his gun, but something told him bullets would not help him now. The women kept singing as they descended, their voices weaving together in a harmony that made his head swim. He tried to look away, but found he could not. Their eyes locked onto his, dark and bottomless as wells. The first woman reached the bottom of the slope and smiled at him. Her teeth were very white. Too white. When she took another step forward, Jack heard it. A soft rattling sound, like dried beans in a gourd, like a snake's warning before it strikes. He tried to run, but his legs would not obey. The singing wrapped around him like chains, pulling him forward even as every instinct screamed at him to flee. The 3 women circled him slowly, still humming that eerie melody. Their dresses rustled and shifted, and Jack saw what the fabric had been hiding. Scales, gleaming copper and brown scales that caught the sunlight and threw it back in hypnotic patterns. The women were not women at all, not entirely. Their lower bodies moved with a serpentine grace, and the rattling grew louder as they tightened their circle around him. The tallest one reached out and touched his face with fingers that felt cool despite the desert heat. Her nails were long and sharp, painted the color of dried blood. She leaned close and whispered in his ear, her breath smelling of dust and something ancient and terrible. Jack Murphy opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the woman's smile growing wider, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that no human should possess. The singing rose to a crescendo, drowning out everything else, and then there was nothing but the sound of rattlesnakes in the desert heat. When Deputy Ben Carter found the scene 3 days later, he wished he had not. Jack Murphy's horse lay where it had fallen, already picked clean by vultures. But there was something else. Scattered around the boulder were bones. Human bones. Picked clean and bleached white as if they had been lying in the sun for years instead of days. The mail pouch was gone. So was Jack's gun. But his badge lay in the dust, and beside it, drawn in the sand with a careful hand, was a symbol Ben had seen before. A snake eating its own tail, surrounded by 3 circles. He had seen it carved into rocks throughout these badlands, always in places where men had disappeared. Ben stood up quickly, suddenly aware of how alone he was. The sun was starting to set, painting the rocks blood red. He thought he heard something on the wind. Singing. Faint and far away, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, sweet as honey and cold as the grave. He mounted his horse and rode hard for Silver Creek, never looking back. Behind him, the singing grew louder for just a moment, then faded into silence. The desert kept its secrets, as it always had. And somewhere in the rocks, something old and patient waited for the next fool to ride this way alone. The town of Silver Creek sat in a shallow valley surrounded by red rock formations that looked like broken teeth against the sky. Ben Carter rode in just as the sun dipped below the horizon, his horse lathered with sweat and trembling. He went straight to the sheriff's office, where he found Sheriff Cole Hayes sitting behind his desk, cleaning his rifle. Cole looked up as Ben burst through the door, and his weathered face went grave when he saw the deputy's expression. Ben was young, barely 23, but he was not the type to spook easy. Whatever he had seen out in the Badlands had shaken him badly. Ben told his story in a rush, words tumbling over each other. Jack Murphy's body, or what was left of it, the bones scattered like dice, the symbol in the sand, and the singing. When he mentioned the singing, Cole's hands stopped moving on his rifle. He set the weapon down carefully and leaned back in his chair. Cole had been sheriff of Silver Creek for 32 years. He had seen rustlers and murderers, Indian raids and range wars, but he had also seen things that did not fit into neat categories, things that made him wonder if the old stories his grandmother had told him were more than just tales to frighten children. The Rattlesnake brides, that was what the Apache called them. Women who were not women, creatures that had lived in these deserts since before the Spanish came, maybe longer. Ben finished his story and waited for Cole to laugh, to tell him he had been seeing things in the heat. But Cole did not laugh. Instead, he stood up and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of the office. He pulled out a key from around his neck and opened it, revealing a collection of strange items. Dried herbs tied with leather cord, small pouches filled with things Ben could not identify, and a journal, old and leather-bound, its pages yellow with age. Cole brought the journal back to his desk and opened it. The pages were covered in cramped handwriting, along with sketches and symbols. Some of the symbols matched the one Ben had seen in the sand. Cole turned the pages until he found what he was looking for, then pushed the journal across the desk so Ben could see. The entry was dated 18 years earlier. Cole's handwriting had been neater then, less shaky. It described the disappearance of a prospector named William Grant. His camp had been found abandoned, his gear scattered, and his bones laid out in a perfect circle. And nearby, the same symbol, a snake eating its tail, surrounded by 3 circles. Ben looked up at Cole with wide eyes. The sheriff nodded slowly. There were more entries. Over the years, Cole had documented 11 disappearances in the Badlands outside Silver Creek. All men traveling alone, all found the same way, if they were found at all, and always, somewhere near the scene, that symbol appeared. Cole explained what he had learned over the decades. The Rattlesnake brides were not just legend. They were real, or as real as anything got out in those haunted deserts. They appeared as beautiful women to lure men close, then revealed their true nature. Half woman, half serpent, they killed their victims and consumed them slowly, leaving nothing but bones behind. The Apache avoided certain areas of the Badlands for this reason. The Mexican vaqueros who worked the ranches to the south knew the stories too, and they never rode alone through the dangerous places. But white men were stubborn. They did not believe in old stories. They thought their guns and their horses and their courage would protect them from anything, and so they kept disappearing, one by one, year after year. Cole had tried to warn people, but it was hard to make someone believe in monsters when the sun was shining and the world seemed solid and real. Most folks thought he was getting old and superstitious. They smiled and nodded and went about their business. Ben asked the question that had been burning in his mind since he found Jack Murphy's remains. Could they be killed? Cole closed the journal and shook his head. He did not know. The Apache said the Rattlesnake brides could only be harmed by specific methods, rituals that required preparation and knowledge he did not possess. Bullets might slow them down, but ordinary lead could not kill something that was already more spirit than flesh. The 2 men sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of Silver Creek settling in for the night. Somewhere down the street, a piano played in the saloon. Dogs barked, normal sounds of a normal town. But just a few miles away, in the Red Rock Badlands, something ancient and hungry was waiting in the darkness. Ben asked what they should do. Cole thought about it, then made a decision. Tomorrow, they would ride out to the site where Ben had found Jack Murphy's bones. They would bring salt and sage, items the Apache used for protection. They would document what they found and give Jack a proper burial, even if there was not much left to bury. And they would warn everyone in town to stay away from the eastern Badlands until this thing was resolved. But even as Cole spoke, he knew it would not be enough. The Rattlesnake brides had been hunting in these deserts for generations. They were patient. They could wait months or years between kills, and there was always another fool who thought he was too smart or too tough to fall victim to an old story. That night, Ben could not sleep. He lay in his bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the walls. And beneath the wind, so faint he almost convinced himself he was imagining it, he heard singing. That same eerie melody that had haunted the desert where Jack Murphy died. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, drifting through the darkness, like smoke. He got up and went to the window. The moon was nearly full, casting Silver Creek in silver light. The street below was empty. Nothing moved except a tumbleweed rolling past the general store. But when Ben looked toward the eastern edge of town, toward the Badlands, he thought he saw shapes moving in the darkness. Tall shapes that swayed and flowed like smoke. And for just a moment he could have sworn he saw eyes reflecting the moonlight, cold and reptilian, watching the town with ancient hunger. Ben stepped back from the window and checked his gun.
6 bullets.
He wondered if that would be enough. Somehow he doubted it. The Rattlesnake brides had been killing men in these deserts since before his grandfather was born. They had survived everything the world could throw at them. What chance did one young deputy have against something like that? But Ben Carter was not the type to back down from a fight, even when the odds were stacked against him. He had pinned on his badge because he wanted to protect people, to make a difference. If there was something out there killing innocent travelers, then it was his job to stop it, or die trying. He sat on the edge of his bed, gun in his lap, and waited for morning. Outside, the singing continued, rising and falling on the desert wind. And in the Badlands, 3 figures moved through the moonlight, their scales gleaming like copper coins, their eyes searching for the next fool who would wander into their territory alone and unprotected. Dawn came slowly to Silver Creek. Ben had not slept, and when he met Cole at the sheriff's office, he could see the older man had not either. They loaded their saddlebags with supplies. Water, food, ammunition. Cole added the items from his locked cabinet. The dried herbs, the pouches of salt. A small bottle of what he said was consecrated water, though Ben was not sure he believed in such things. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, painting the Badlands in shades of gold and crimson. The rocks cast long shadows that looked like grasping fingers. Neither man spoke much. There was nothing to say that had not already been said. It took them 2 hours to reach the place where Ben had found Jack Murphy. The bones were still there, scattered around the boulder. Cole dismounted and walked among them slowly, his face grim. He had known Jack. They had played cards together sometimes at the saloon. Now Jack was nothing but sun-bleached bones and a memory. Cole found the symbol in the sand, exactly as Ben had described. He knelt beside it and studied it for a long moment, then pulled out his journal and compared it to the sketches he had made over the years. It was identical to the others, the same snake eating its tail. The same 3 circles. Whatever had killed Jack Murphy had killed those other men too. Ben kept watch while Cole worked, his hand never far from his gun. The desert seemed too quiet. No birds sang, no lizards skittered across the rocks. It was as if every living thing had fled this place, leaving only death behind. Cole gathered Jack's bones carefully and wrapped them in a blanket. They would take them back to Silver Creek for a proper burial. As he worked, he told Ben more about what he had learned over the years. The Rattlesnake brides appeared most often in the spring and fall, when travelers were moving through the territory. They seemed to prefer men who rode alone, men who carried valuables or mail. They were intelligent, calculating. They set ambushes and used their appearance to lure victims close before revealing their true nature. But there were gaps in Cole's knowledge. He did not know where the creatures lived when they were not hunting. He did not know how many of them existed. 3 seemed to travel together, but were there others? Were they all female, or did males exist somewhere? Did they age and die like mortal creatures, or were they truly immortal? These questions had plagued Cole for years. He had tried to find answers in old books, in Apache legends, in the stories passed down by Mexican settlers, but the information was fragmentary and contradictory. Some sources said the Rattlesnake brides were demons, others said they were cursed women, transformed by dark magic into monsters. A few claimed they were something older than humanity, creatures that had existed in these deserts since the world was young. Cole finished wrapping the bones and tied the bundle to his saddle. As he did, Ben called out sharply. He was pointing toward a formation of rocks about 50 yards away. Something was moving there. Something big. Both men drew their guns and moved toward the rocks cautiously. Cole's heart was pounding. After all these years of documenting disappearances and studying old legends, he might finally come face to face with the creatures responsible. Part of him wanted to turn and ride away, but another part, the part that had made him a lawman, pushed him forward. They reached the rocks and found fresh tracks in the sand. Not human tracks. These were long and sinuous, as if something had dragged itself across the ground, and there was a smell, faint but distinct. Like desert flowers mixed with something else. Something that reminded Cole of the smell of a snake den he had stumbled across as a boy. The tracks led into a narrow canyon that cut between two massive rock formations. Cole and Ben exchanged glances. Every instinct screamed at them not to enter that canyon. It was a perfect ambush site, with high walls on both sides and only one way in or out. But the tracks were fresh. If they wanted to find the Rattlesnake brides, this might be their only chance. They tied their horses at the canyon entrance and proceeded on foot. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper into the narrow passage. The walls rose high on either side, blocking out most of the sunlight. Strange symbols were carved into the rock faces. More snakes eating their tails, more circles. Some of the carvings looked ancient, worn smooth by centuries of wind and sand. Then Ben stopped suddenly, grabbing Cole's arm. Ahead of them, the canyon opened into a wider space, and there, arranged in a perfect circle, were bones. Dozens of sets of bones, maybe hundreds. They were stacked carefully, almost reverently, creating a massive shrine to death. In the center of the circle stood three figures. They had their backs turned, but even from behind, Cole could see they were not natural. Their long dark hair moved on its own, writhing like living things. Their bodies swayed in a hypnotic rhythm, and they were singing that same eerie melody Ben had described. Cole raised his gun, but his hand was shaking. After all these years of wondering, of documenting deaths and studying legends, the Rattlesnake brides were real, they existed, and they were right in front of him. The singing stopped. As one, the three figures turned to face the two men. Their beauty was shocking. Perfect faces with full lips and dark eyes. But there was something wrong about those eyes. They were too large, too dark, and when the creatures smiled, their mouths opened too wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth that gleamed in the dim light. The tallest of the three spoke, and her voice was like honey poured over broken glass. She asked what brought two lawmen to their sacred place. She said they did not often receive visitors who survived long enough to find this canyon. Most died screaming in the desert, their bones added to the collection. Cole found his voice and demanded to know why they were killing innocent people. The Rattlesnake bride laughed, a sound that echoed off the canyon walls like shattering crystal. She said they were not killing innocent people. They were simply feeding. Just as humans hunted animals for food, they hunted humans. It was the natural order of things. They had been doing it since before the first tribes arrived in these lands. They would continue doing it long after Silver Creek was dust and forgotten. Ben raised his gun and told them it ended now. The three Rattlesnake brides laughed together, and their laughter made the ground beneath the men's feet vibrate. Then they began to change. Their beautiful forms rippled and shifted. Their legs fused together, forming thick serpentine bodies covered in copper and brown scales. They grew larger, towering over the two men. Their arms lengthened, fingers becoming claws. Only their faces remained almost human, though their eyes now glowed with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. Cole pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. His bullet struck the tallest Rattlesnake bride in the chest, but she did not even flinch. The lead passed through her body as if she were made of smoke. She smiled wider and began to glide toward them, her massive tail leaving a wide track in the sand. Ben opened fire too, emptying his gun into the advancing creatures. The bullets had no effect. The Rattlesnake brides kept coming, moving with terrifying speed despite their size. Cole fumbled for the items in his saddlebag. Salt. Sage. The consecrated water. His hands closed around the bottle just as the first Rattlesnake bride reached him. She struck like a snake, inhumanly fast. Her claws raked across Cole's chest, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. He fell backward, the bottle flying from his hand. It shattered on the rocks, the consecrated water soaking into the sand. The Rattlesnake bride loomed over him, her mouth opening wide. Cole could see down her throat, see the darkness waiting there to swallow him whole. Then Ben was there, grabbing Cole and dragging him backward. The young deputy had dropped his useless gun and pulled out a knife instead. It was not much of a weapon against creatures that could not be harmed by bullets, but it was all he had. He slashed at the Rattlesnake bride, and to his surprise she recoiled, not from the knife itself, but from something on the blade. It was made of silver, a gift from his mother when he became a deputy. Pure silver, polished to a mirror shine. The rattlesnake bride hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a boiler. The other two creatures stopped their advance, their glowing eyes fixed on the silver blade. Ben helped Cole to his feet, keeping the knife between them and the monsters. The creatures did not attack again, but they did not retreat either. They simply watched, swaying slightly, the rattles creating a chorus that filled the canyon with menacing sound. Cole realized they had stumbled onto something important. Silver. The Apache had mentioned silver in their stories, but Cole had not paid enough attention. Silver could hurt these things, maybe even kill them, but one small knife was not enough. They needed more, much more. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, slowly, the rattlesnake brides began to retreat. They glided backward into the shadows at the far end of the canyon, their eyes never leaving the two men. The tallest one spoke again, her voice cold with promise. She said they would meet again. Silver Creek would pay for this intrusion. They had been patient for generations, taking only a few victims each year, but now they were angry. Now they would feast. Then they were gone, vanishing into darkness so complete it seemed unnatural. Cole and Ben stood frozen, barely breathing, waiting to see if the creatures would return. When several minutes passed with no sign of them, the two men finally turned and ran. They ran through the canyon, stumbling over rocks, not caring about dignity or courage. They just ran, driven by primal fear that went back to humanity's earliest days, when predators hunted humans through the darkness. They reached their horses and mounted without speaking. Only when Silver Creek came into view did they finally slow down. Cole's chest was bleeding through his torn shirt, 3 deep gouges from the rattlesnake bride's claws. Ben tore strips from his own shirt and bandaged the wounds as best he could. As they rode into town, Cole made a decision. They could not keep this secret any longer. The whole town needed to know what was out there in the Badlands. They needed to warn everyone, arm everyone. Silver could hurt the rattlesnake brides. That meant they could be fought, maybe even killed. But even as he thought this, Cole remembered the look in those glowing eyes. The ancient intelligence, the utter confidence. The rattlesnake brides had been hunting these deserts for countless generations. They had survived everything the world had thrown at them. 2 lawmen with 1 silver knife were not going to stop them. Still, Cole had to try. Because if he did not, Silver Creek would become a graveyard. The creatures had made that clear. They were coming for the town. And when they arrived, only Silver and courage would stand between the people and total annihilation. Cole called an emergency town meeting that evening. Every able-bodied person in Silver Creek crowded into the church, the only building large enough to hold them all. There were about 80 people in total. Ranchers and shopkeepers, miners and saloon girls, old-timers and young families. They all looked at Cole with varying expressions of curiosity and concern as he stood at the front of the church, his bandaged chest visible beneath his torn shirt. He told them everything. About the rattlesnake brides, about the bones in the canyon, about the attack and their narrow escape. Some people listened with growing horror. Others shook their heads, clearly thinking the sheriff had lost his mind. A few laughed outright, convinced it was some kind of elaborate joke. A rancher named Pete Sullivan stood up and said Cole had been in the sun too long. There were no such things as snake women. Jack Murphy probably got himself killed by bandits or Apaches, and Cole was just making up stories to cover up the fact that he had not caught the real killers. Several people murmured in agreement, but then an old Mexican woman named Maria Gonzalez spoke up from the back of the church. She said her grandmother had told her stories about Las Novias de Cascabel, the rattlesnake brides. They were real. Her people had known about them for generations. They lived in the deep desert, in places where water never flowed and the rocks themselves seemed cursed. They appeared as beautiful women to lure men to their deaths, and they could only be harmed by silver or by ancient rituals most people had forgotten. Maria's testimony changed the mood in the church. She was respected in Silver Creek, known as a healer and wise woman. If she said the creatures were real, people were more inclined to believe. The laughter died away, replaced by nervous whispers. Ben stood up and showed them his silver knife, the blade that had made the rattlesnake brides recoil. He explained that silver seemed to be their weakness. If the town could gather enough silver, they might be able to defend themselves. Cole added that they needed to set up watches, make sure no one traveled alone into the Badlands, and prepare for an attack. The creatures had promised to return. When they did, Silver Creek needed to be ready. The town doctor, a practical man named Henry Foster, asked how much time they had. Cole admitted he did not know. Could be days. Could be weeks. The rattlesnake brides moved according to their own timeline. But the threat was real, and they needed to act immediately. After much debate, the town agreed to Cole's plan. They would pool their silver, jewelry, coins, anything made of the metal. The blacksmith, a burly man named Carl Jenkins, said he could melt it down and forge weapons. Bullets, knife blades, even arrowheads if needed. It would take time, but it could be done. The women of Silver Creek organized themselves into groups to maintain constant watches around the town's perimeter. The men began building barricades at the main approaches. Even the skeptics pitched in, figuring it was better to be prepared for a threat that might not exist than to be caught off guard if it did. Over the next 3 days, Silver Creek transformed into an armed camp. Carl Jenkins worked around the clock at his forge, melting down donated silver and casting it into weapons. The pile of silver grew larger as people brought everything they could spare. Wedding rings, pocket watches. The saloon owner even donated a set of silver-plated serving trays his mother had given him. By the 3rd day, they had enough silver for 50 bullets, a dozen knife blades, and 4 short swords. It was not much, but it was something. Cole distributed the weapons to the best shots in town. Ben got one of the swords, along with a gun loaded with silver bullets. Cole took another sword and gun for himself. That night, as the sun set over the Badlands, the singing began. It drifted across the desert from the east, multiple voices harmonizing in that eerie melody. Everyone in Silver Creek heard it. The sound made babies cry and dogs howl. It made grown men shiver and women grab their children clothes. Cole stood at the eastern barricade with Ben and a dozen others, silver weapons ready. The singing grew louder. Then they saw movement in the darkness beyond the town. Shapes flowing across the sand like water. More than 3 this time. Many more. The moonlight caught scales and reflected them back, creating a shifting carpet of copper and brown that seemed to stretch for hundreds of yards. Someone behind Cole whispered that there must be dozens of them. Maybe hundreds? They had thought there were only 3 rattlesnake brides, but clearly that was wrong. This was a whole colony, a whole society of these creatures. And they were all coming for Silver Creek.
The singing stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise.
Then a voice called out from the darkness. The tallest rattlesnake bride, the one who had spoken to them in the canyon. She said they had one chance to avoid total destruction. Surrender the 2 lawmen who had violated their sacred place. Deliver Cole Hayes and Ben Carter to them, and the rest of the town would be spared. Cole felt everyone's eyes turned toward him. He could not blame them for considering it. 2 lives in exchange for 80. It was simple mathematics. Pete Sullivan actually started to say they should do it, but Maria Gonzalez cut him off sharply. She said they would not sacrifice innocent men to monsters. If they did, they would be no better than the creatures themselves. Cole appreciated the support, but he also knew what was coming. He had seen these creatures up close. Seen their size, their speed, their power. Silver might hurt them, but would it be enough? The town had maybe 4 hours of ammunition if they rationed their shots. After that, they would be helpless. Ben stepped forward and called out to the rattlesnake brides. He said Silver Creek would not surrender anyone. If they wanted the 2 lawmen, they would have to come and take them. And they would find that humans were not as easy to kill as they thought. The response was immediate and terrible. The rattlesnake brides screamed, a sound that shattered windows and made the ground shake. Then they attacked. They came pouring out of the darkness, dozens of massive serpentine forms gliding across the sand faster than horses could run. Their eyes glowed in the night, creating a field of cold light that bore down on the town. Cole gave the order to fire. The air filled with gunshots as defenders opened up with everything they had. Most bullets passed harmlessly through the attacking creatures, but the silver rounds struck home. When a rattlesnake bride was hit by silver, she screamed and recoiled, dark ichor flowing from the wound. The silver burned them, causing real pain and real damage. But there were too many of them. For every one they wounded, 5 more pressed forward. The creatures reached the barricades and tore through them like paper. Their claws ripped wood apart. Their tails smashed supports. Within minutes, the eastern barricade was destroyed, and rattlesnake brides were pouring into Silver Creek. The fighting became chaotic and desperate. Cole swung his silver sword, cutting deep into a creature that lunged at him. She fell back screaming, but another took her place immediately. Ben fought beside him, his blade flashing in the moonlight. All around them, townspeople fought for their lives with whatever they had. Silver weapons, fire, even holy symbols from the church. Some things worked, many did not. Carl Jenkins, the blacksmith, wielded a massive silver hammer. He brought it down on a rattlesnake bride's skull with crushing force, and she collapsed, twitching. It was the first kill anyone had managed, and it gave the defenders hope. These things could die. They just had to hit hard enough with the right weapons. But the hope was short-lived. More creatures kept coming. They dragged screaming victims into the darkness. They smashed buildings and set fires. Silver Creek was being torn apart. Cole realized with sick certainty that they were going to lose. There were simply too many rattlesnake brides. Even with silver weapons, the town was outnumbered and outmatched. Then Maria Gonzalez appeared, running from her small house at the edge of town. She was carrying something, a large clay pot covered with strange symbols. She shouted something in Spanish, words Cole did not understand. Then she hurled the pot into the center of the main street, where it shattered with a sound like thunder. White smoke billowed out, spreading rapidly through the town. Wherever it touched the rattlesnake brides, they recoiled violently. Their screams changed pitch, becoming higher, more anguished. The smoke seemed to burn them worse than silver, worse than fire. They began to retreat, pulling back toward the desert. Maria stood in the middle of the street, chanting in a language even older than Spanish. Apache, Cole realized, or something that predated even the Apache. The smoke continued to spread, driving the rattlesnake brides before it. Within minutes, they were all fleeing, slithering back into the darkness from which they had come. Their enraged screams faded into the distance, and then there was silence. The battle was over. Silver Creek had survived, but at a terrible cost. Cole looked around at the destruction. Buildings burned. The barricades were destroyed, and bodies lay in the street. He counted 8 dead, including Pete Sullivan and young Henry Foster's wife. Dozens more were wounded. The town had survived, but it had been broken. Maria collapsed, exhausted from whatever ritual she had performed. Ben caught her before she hit the ground. She was mumbling something about her grandmother's teachings, about the old ways that protected against the dark things in the desert. Cole knelt beside her and thanked her. She had saved them all. Over the next few hours, as they fought the fires and tended to the wounded, the survivors of Silver Creek began to understand what had happened. They had been attacked by something ancient and powerful, something that most of the world no longer believed existed. And they had survived only because of one old woman's knowledge and courage. But Cole knew it was not over. The rattlesnake brides would return. They had been driven off, not destroyed. Somewhere out in the Badlands, they were licking their wounds and planning their revenge. Next time, they would be ready for the silver. Next time, they would know about Maria's protective smoke. As dawn broke over the shattered town, Cole made another decision. He could not fight these creatures with just Silver Creek's resources. He needed help. Real help. The army. The territorial governor. Anyone who would listen. These creatures were not just Silver Creek's problem. They were a threat to everyone who traveled through these Badlands. But first, they had to bury their dead and rebuild. And they had to prepare for the next attack, because Cole was certain it would come. The rattlesnake brides had been hunting in these deserts for countless generations. They would not give up their territory without a fight, and that fight had only just begun. Ben stood beside Cole as they watched the sun rise, turning the desert from black to gold. The young deputy's face was grim, aged by what he had witnessed. He asked Cole if they could really win against creatures like that. Cole did not answer right away. He was not sure himself. But he knew they had to try, because the alternative was unthinkable. The week following the attack was the hardest Silver Creek had ever endured. They buried their dead in the town cemetery on a hillside overlooking the valley. 8 graves in a row. Pete Sullivan, Henry Foster's wife, Linda, a miner named Jack Crawford, 2 ranch hands, a woman who worked at the general store, and 2 children who had been caught outside when the rattlesnake brides broke through the barricades. The whole town attended the funeral. Father O'Brien, who ran the small Catholic church, said prayers over each grave. But his words felt hollow in the face of what they had witnessed. How do you pray for protection when you have seen monsters tear through your town? How do you maintain faith when the things your church says do not exist have killed your neighbors? Maria Gonzalez stood apart from the crowd, leaning heavily on a walking stick. The ritual she had performed had drained something essential from her. She looked older now, frailer, but her eyes were still sharp, still watchful. Cole approached her after the burial and asked about the smoke that had driven off the creatures. She explained it was a mixture her grandmother had taught her to make. Sage, salt, blessed water, and other ingredients she would not name. A protection against evil spirits, she called it. The rattlesnake brides were old enough that such protection still affected them. Cole asked if she could make more. Maria nodded but said it would take time. Some of the ingredients were rare. And the ritual itself was exhausting. She could not perform it often, not at her age. They needed another solution. A permanent one. Ben suggested they track the creatures to their lair and finish them while they were weak. Several of the surviving defenders agreed. Take the fight to the monsters before they recovered and attacked again. But Cole shook his head. They had no idea where the creatures lived. The Badlands stretched for hundreds of miles. The Rattlesnake brides could be anywhere in that vast emptiness. And hunting them would mean leaving Silver Creek undefended. Carl Jenkins had another suggestion. He could make more silver weapons with time. Much more. If they could source enough silver, they could arm every person in town. Make Silver Creek a fortress that the Rattlesnake brides would think twice about attacking. The problem was cost. Silver was expensive. They had already used up most of the town's personal items. To buy more would require money they did not have. Cole thought about the mail route Jack Murphy had been riding when he was killed. Jack had been carrying something valuable in that mail pouch. Cole had never recovered it, but he knew what was supposed to be in that delivery. $3,000 in silver certificates being transferred from the bank in Silver Creek to the bank in Tombstone. If they could find that mail pouch, they would have the funds to buy all the silver they needed, which meant going back to the place where Jack had died, back into the Badlands. The same Badlands where the Rattlesnake brides were presumably recovering from their defeat. It was dangerous, probably suicidal. But what choice did they have? Ben volunteered immediately. Several others did too, including Carl Jenkins and a tough rancher named Luke Morrison. Cole tried to argue them out of it, but they would not be swayed. They had seen their friends and neighbors killed. They wanted to hit back. And if finding that mail pouch meant giving Silver Creek a real chance to defend itself, they were willing to risk it. They prepared for 2 days, gathered weapons and supplies. Maria made them small pouches filled with her protective mixture to be worn around their necks. She said it might help, but cautioned them not to rely on it. The pouches would not stop a Rattlesnake bride, only make them hesitate for a moment. That moment might be enough to save their lives. Or it might not. On the third morning after the attack, Cole led a group of 5 men out of Silver Creek. Himself, Ben, Carl, Luke, and a tracker named Frank Booth. Frank was half Apache, raised by his mother's people before coming to live in the white world. He knew the Badlands better than anyone, and he claimed he could find the place where Jack Murphy had died even with his eyes closed. They rode east as the sun climbed, following the same route Jack had taken on his final mail run. The desert seemed different now, more menacing. Every rock formation could hide a monster. Every shadow could conceal an ambush. The men rode close together, hands never far from their weapons. By noon, they reached the canyon where Ben had found Jack's bones. The symbol in the sand was still there, though partially eroded by wind. Cole felt his chest tighten. His wounds from the Rattlesnake bride's claws had healed, but he could still feel them, a reminder of how close he had come to dying. Frank dismounted and studied the ground. He found the tracks easily. Jack's horse, Jack's boots, and the sinuous trails left by the Rattlesnake brides. Frank said the creatures had dragged Jack to the north toward a formation of red rocks about 2 miles away. If the mail pouch had not been taken, it might still be there. They followed the tracks cautiously. Frank leading, Cole and Ben flanking, Carl and Luke watching their backs. The sun beat down mercilessly. Cole's mouth was dry despite the water they carried. He kept expecting to hear that terrible singing, to see serpentine shapes flowing toward them across the rocks. But the desert remained silent and empty. The red rock formation appeared ahead, a cluster of massive boulders that had been sculpted by wind and time into fantastic shapes. Frank pointed to a narrow gap between 2 of the largest rocks. The tracks led there. Cole felt his stomach tighten. It was the perfect ambush site. High walls on all sides. Limited visibility. If the Rattlesnake brides were waiting, they were all dead men. But they had come this far. Turning back now would mean they had wasted the trip and risked their lives for nothing. Cole checked his gun, loaded with silver bullets, and led the way into the gap. The others followed, weapons ready, every sense alert. The gap widened into a small natural amphitheater, and there, piled in the center, were Jack Murphy's belongings, his saddle, his rifle, and his mail pouch, lying on top of the pile like an offering. It seemed too easy. Cole's instincts screamed danger, but they needed that pouch. Ben moved forward carefully, reaching for the mail pouch. His fingers had just closed around it when the attack came, not from the ground, but from above. The Rattlesnake brides had been clinging to the rock walls overhead, perfectly camouflaged against the stone. They dropped like spiders, landing around the 5 men with bone-jarring impacts. There were 4 of them, not the 3 Cole had seen before, but 4. Which meant there were even more of these creatures than they had thought. The Rattlesnake brides had set a trap, using Jack's belongings as bait, and Cole had walked right into it. The tallest creature, the one Cole recognized from their first encounter, smiled at him with too many teeth. She said they had been waiting. She had known the humans would come back for the shiny paper in the bag. Humans always came back for their precious paper and metal. It made them predictable, easy to hunt. Cole did not wait for her to finish. He raised his gun and fired. The silver bullet struck her in the shoulder, and she screamed, dark ichor flowing from the wound. But she did not fall. She lunged forward, moving with blinding speed. Cole barely dodged, rolling to the side as her claws gouged deep furrows in the rock where he had been standing. All around him, chaos erupted. Ben was fighting two of the Rattlesnake brides simultaneously, his silver sword flashing as he parried strikes that would have killed him instantly. Carl swung his massive hammer, connecting with a creature's midsection and driving her back. Luke and Frank fired their guns, silver bullets finding targets but not doing enough damage to stop the assault. Cole scrambled to his feet and drew his sword. The wounded Rattlesnake bride was circling him, her glowing eyes fixed on his throat. She was more cautious now, aware that he could hurt her. Good. Fear was a weapon, too. Cole feinted left, then struck right, his blade cutting deep into her side. She shrieked and retreated, but another creature took her place. This one was different. Smaller, younger perhaps, but faster. Her attacks came like lightning, claws and fangs working in perfect coordination. Cole parried desperately, his sword meeting her claws with showers of sparks. She was driving him backward toward the rock wall. Once she had him trapped, it would be over. Then Ben was there, his sword taking the creature in the back. She arched and screamed, twisting to face this new threat. It gave Cole the opening he needed. He drove his blade through her chest, angling up toward where he hoped her heart was. The silver burned through her flesh, and she convulsed violently. For a moment, Cole thought she would recover. Then her eyes dimmed, and she collapsed, dead. But there was no time to celebrate. Carl was down, blood streaming from deep gashes in his leg. Frank was cornered, out of silver bullets and trying to fend off a Rattlesnake bride with just his knife. Luke was nowhere to be seen. Cole heard a scream from beyond the amphitheater and realized with horror that the creatures had dragged Luke away. The remaining 3 Rattlesnake brides seemed to sense they were losing. They retreated to the far side of the amphitheater, hissing and rattling but not attacking. They were reassessing. Cole, Ben, and Frank formed a defensive line in front of the wounded Carl. 4 against 3 now. Better odds than before, but still deadly. The tallest Rattlesnake bride spoke again. She said this was not over. They had killed one of her sisters. Death would be avenged 100-fold. Silver Creek would burn. Every man, woman, and child would feed them. The humans had made an enemy they could not defeat. Then, before any of the men could react, the 3 creatures turned and flowed up the rock walls with impossible speed. Within seconds, they were gone, vanishing over the rim of the amphitheater and into the desert beyond. Cole thought about pursuing them but immediately dismissed the idea. Carl was badly injured, Luke was probably dead, and they still needed to get the mail pouch back to Silver Creek. Ben retrieved the pouch while Frank applied rough bandages to Carl's leg. The blacksmith had lost a lot of blood, but he would survive if they got him back to town quickly. They searched for Luke but found only his hat and his gun. There were drag marks leading away from the amphitheater, but they ended at bare rock. The Rattlesnake brides had taken him. Whether he was dead or alive, Cole could not say. But the odds were not good. They made a crude stretcher for Carl and began the long journey back to Silver Creek. Frank led them by a different route, one that took longer but offered better visibility and fewer ambush points. No one spoke much. They were all thinking about Luke, about the Rattlesnake bride they had killed, about the promise of revenge that had been made. They reached Silver Creek just before sunset. The townspeople rushed out to help, taking Carl to the doctor, securing the mail pouch. When Cole opened it, he found the silver certificates intact, along with letters and other documents. $3,000, enough to buy all the silver they would need. But it had cost them Luke Morrison's life. And it had confirmed what Cole feared most. The war with the Rattlesnake brides was far from over. It was just beginning. That night, as Cole sat in his office staring at the recovered mail pouch, Maria Gonzalez came to see him. She said she had been thinking about what needed to be done. The Rattlesnake brides were a wound in the world, she explained. A corruption that had festered for too long. They could not be defeated with weapons alone. Someone needed to go to their source, to the heart of their power, and destroy them there. Cole asked where that was. Maria said her grandmother had told her stories about a place deep in the Badlands, a canyon so deep and dark that sunlight never reached the bottom. That was where the Rattlesnake brides were born, where they returned when they were close to death. It was their sacred place, and if someone could reach it, If they could disrupt whatever dark power sustained the creatures, the rattlesnake brides might be destroyed permanently. Cole listened, his mind working. It was dangerous. Probably impossible. But what choice did they have? The creatures would keep attacking until Silver Creek was destroyed. And then they would move on to the next town. And the next. Someone had to stop them. The question was who? Ben entered the office, overhearing the last part of the conversation. He volunteered immediately. Cole tried to argue, but Ben cut him off. He said he had seen what these creatures could do. He had watched them kill children. He was young, strong, and he had nothing to lose. If there was a chance to end this threat permanently, he would take it. Maria told them more about what her grandmother had described. The journey would take days. The path was treacherous, through parts of the Badlands that even the Apache avoided, and at the center of it all was the deep canyon, where reality itself seemed twisted. But there were also signs to look for. Ancient markers left by people who had tried to fight the rattlesnake brides before. If Ben could follow those markers, he might find the way. Cole realized he could not let Ben go alone. Despite his age, despite his wounds, he was still the sheriff. This was his responsibility. Together they might have a chance. Carl offered to come too, but his injuries made that impossible. Frank Booth stepped forward instead. He said his Apache grandmother had told him similar stories. He believed Maria, and he knew how to survive in the deep desert. So it was decided. 3 men would make the journey. Cole, Ben, and Frank. They would take enough silver weapons and protective charms to hopefully keep them alive. They would find the deep canyon. And they would do whatever it took to destroy the source of the rattlesnake bride's power. Or die trying. They spent 2 days preparing. Carl forged them special silver-edged knives, silver-tipped spears, and even a few silver chains that could be used as weapons or traps. Maria worked day and night, creating protective pouches, mixing her potions and chanting her prayers. The townspeople donated supplies, food, water, anything that might help. On the morning of their departure, Father O'Brien blessed them at the church. Most of the town turned out to see them off. Everyone knew this might be the last time they saw these 3 men alive. But everyone also understood the necessity. If the rattlesnake brides were not stopped at their source, Silver Creek had no future. Cole, Ben, and Frank rode out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. They carried enough supplies for 10 days, along with their weapons and Maria's protections. Maria had given Cole a final gift, a small clay jar sealed with wax. She said it contained the most powerful version of her grandmother's mixture. Use it only at the very end, she warned, in the deep canyon itself. It would either save them or kill them. There would be no middle ground. The first 2 days of travel were uneventful. They followed Frank's guidance, moving through parts of the Badlands they had never seen before. The landscape grew stranger the farther east they went. Rock formations that seemed to defy gravity. Plants that should not be able to survive in such harsh conditions. And everywhere, that feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. On the 3rd day, they found the first marker, a stone cairn covered with symbols. The same snake eating its tail they had seen before, but also other markings. Some looked like crude maps. Others seemed to be warnings. Frank studied them carefully and announced they were on the right path. The deep canyon was still 2 days ahead. That night, as they camped in the shadow of a massive rock formation, the singing began. All 3 men heard it, multiple voices, distant but clear. The rattlesnake brides knew they were coming. Of course they did. This was their territory. They had probably been tracking the men since they left Silver Creek. Cole checked his weapons and told the others to stay alert. They would take turns keeping watch. 4 hours each. If the creatures attacked, they would at least have warning. Ben took the first watch, sitting with his back to the fire, silver sword across his knees. Cole tried to sleep, but found it impossible. Every sound made him reach for his gun. Every shadow seemed to move with serpentine grace. The attack came during Frank's watch, in the hours just before dawn. The tracker never had a chance to shout a warning. One moment he was alert, scanning the darkness. The next, a rattlesnake bride had him in her coils, lifting him off the ground. Frank struggled, trying to reach his knife, but the creature's grip was too strong. She began to squeeze, and Cole heard bones crack. He and Ben were on their feet instantly, weapons drawn, but they were too late. The rattlesnake bride hurled Frank's broken body at them, then vanished into the darkness. More shapes moved in the shadows around their camp. 4, 5, maybe more. They were surrounded. Cole and Ben stood back to back, weapons ready. The singing started again. Closer now, hypnotic and terrible. Cole felt his mind beginning to fog, his limbs growing heavy. The creatures were not just physical threats. They could affect the mind, too. He bit down hard on his tongue, using pain to clear his thoughts. Beside him, Ben was doing the same. The Rattlesnake brides circled them slowly, taking their time. They knew they had won. 2 men alone in the desert could not defeat them. It was only a matter of time. The tallest creature, the one Cole had faced before, glided forward. Her scales gleamed in the firelight. She said they had been foolish to come here. This was the heart of her kind's territory. The deep canyon was close, yes, but they would never reach it. Their bones would join all the others who had tried before them. Cole drew Maria's jar from his pack. The Rattlesnake bride's eyes widened. She recognized it. She hissed something in a language Cole did not understand, and the other creatures stopped their advance. They were afraid of the jar.
Good.
Fear gave him leverage. He told the Rattlesnake bride they could fight here and now, and he would break the jar and release whatever was inside, or she could let them pass, let them reach the deep canyon. What happened there would happen regardless. But at least this way, some of them might survive. The creature considered this. Her glowing eyes never left the jar in Cole's hand. Then she laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. She said they could pass. Not because she feared the jar, but because she wanted them to see the deep canyon. To understand the futility of their quest, the power that dwelled there was older than humanity, older than the earth itself. It could not be destroyed by 2 mortal men, no matter how brave or desperate they were. She gestured, and the other Rattlesnake brides retreated into the darkness. Cole and Ben waited, hardly daring to believe they had been allowed to live. Then Ben noticed something that made his blood run cold. Frank's body was gone. While they had been focused on the creatures in front of them, others had taken their friend. He would become another set of bones in the desert, another offering to the Rattlesnake bride's dark hunger. Cole wanted to mourn, but there was no time. They had to keep moving. Dawn was breaking, and the deep canyon was close. They gathered what supplies they could carry and set out on foot, leaving their horses behind. Where they were going, horses could not follow. The landscape changed dramatically as they traveled that day. The rocks became darker, the air grew heavy and difficult to breathe, and there was a smell, faint but pervasive, like decay mixed with something sweet and cloying. Ben covered his mouth with his bandana, and Cole did the same. By late afternoon, they found it, the deep canyon. It appeared suddenly, a massive crack in the earth that stretched as far as they could see in both directions. The walls dropped away into darkness so complete that even the harsh desert sun could not penetrate it. A narrow path led down, carved into the rock face. It was barely wide enough for one person, and there were no railings or safety measures. One wrong step would mean a fall into darkness. Cole and Ben stood at the edge, looking down into that bottomless pit. Both men felt it, a wrongness that went beyond physical fear. This place was cursed, tainted by something ancient and evil. Every instinct screamed at them to turn back. But they had come too far to stop now. They started down the path, moving carefully. The walls of the canyon rose higher and higher above them as they descended. Soon they were walking in twilight, though it was still afternoon above. Strange sounds echoed from the depths. Hissing and rattling, yes, but also other things. Whispers that might have been wind or might have been voices. Music that was not quite music. The path seemed to go on forever, spiraling down and down. Cole lost track of time. It could have been hours or days. His legs ached. His lungs burned from the thick air. Beside him, Ben looked pale and sick. But they kept going. Because stopping meant admitting defeat, and defeat meant Silver Creek would die. Finally, impossibly far below the surface, the path ended at a ledge. And beyond the ledge, Cole saw something that made his mind struggle to comprehend what his eyes were showing him. The canyon opened into a vast cavern, and in the center of that cavern was a pool of liquid that glowed with its own sickly green light. The light revealed hundreds, maybe thousands of rattlesnake brides. They filled the cavern, coiled around each other in massive piles. Some were sleeping, others were engaged in activities Cole could not identify and did not want to understand. And at the very center of it all, rising from the glowing pool, was something that might have been a statue, or might have been alive. It was massive, towering 50 feet high. It had the basic shape of a woman, but its features were serpentine, multiple arms, a head that was more snake than human, and scales that reflected the eerie light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Ben whispered that it must be their goddess, or their mother. Whatever this thing was, it was the source of the Rattlesnake bride's power, and they had to destroy it. Cole pulled out Maria's jar. His hands were shaking. They were standing on a narrow ledge, surrounded by thousands of monsters, facing something that might be a god. 2 men with some silver weapons and a jar of protective mixture. It was laughable. Impossible. But they had no other choice. He threw the jar as hard as he could toward the pool. It arced through the air, tumbling end over end. For a moment Cole thought it would miss. Then it struck the surface of the glowing liquid and shattered. White smoke erupted, just like it had in Silver Creek, but on a massive scale. It spread rapidly, filling the cavern with blinding white mist.
The Rattlesnake brides began to scream. All of them.
Thousands of voices raised in agony as the smoke touched them. They thrashed and writhed, their scales burning where the mist made contact. The statue thing in the center shuddered and began to crack. Fissures appeared in its surface, spreading like spider webs. The green light flickered and dimmed. Cole grabbed Ben and pulled him back toward the path. They had to get out before the whole place came down. Behind them, the screaming intensified. The cavern shook. Rocks began to fall from the ceiling. The statue thing was breaking apart, massive pieces crashing into the pool and sending waves of glowing liquid across the cavern floor. They ran up the path, stumbling and falling, picking themselves up and running again. The canyon wall seemed to be collapsing. The wrongness that had permeated this place was being purged, and the purging was violent. Cole did not know if they would make it out alive, but at least they had struck a blow. At least they had tried. The climb seemed to take even longer than the descent. Their legs burned. Their lungs screamed for air. But they kept climbing, driven by fear and desperate hope. Below them, the sounds of destruction grew. The screaming faded, replaced by a deep rumbling that seemed to come from the earth itself. They burst out of the canyon just as the sun was setting. Both men collapsed on the rim, gasping for air. Behind them, the deep canyon was filling with white smoke. It poured out like water from a fountain, rising into the sky, and from within that smoke, Cole heard the death cries of the Rattlesnake brides. Not just the ones in the cavern, but all of them. Wherever they were in the desert, they were dying. Ben started to laugh, a slightly hysterical sound. They had done it. Against all odds, they had actually done it. The Rattlesnake brides were being destroyed. Silver Creek was safe. The Badlands were being cleansed of an ancient evil. Cole wanted to celebrate, but something stopped him. He noticed Ben was bleeding, a deep gash on his arm that Cole had not seen before, and the wound looked wrong. The edges were blackened and dark veins were spreading from it up Ben's arm. Poison. A Rattlesnake bride must have caught him at some point, and in their desperate flight, neither of them had noticed. Ben saw Cole's expression and looked down at his arm. He went very pale. He said it did not hurt much. Just felt cold. But they both knew what that meant. The poison was spreading. And they were days from Silver Creek, even if they could find their horses. Ben would be dead long before they made it back. Cole refused to accept that. He tore strips from his shirt and bound the wound tightly, trying to slow the poison's spread. He gave Ben water and made him rest. Then he set out to find their horses. It took him until full dark, but he found them grazing near where they had left them. Remarkably, the animals had survived. He brought them back to Ben, who was now shaking with fever. Cole lifted the young deputy onto his horse and tied him in place so he would not fall. Then he mounted his own horse and began the long ride back to Silver Creek. He rode through the night, not stopping, not resting. Ben's breathing grew more labored with each passing hour. The dark veins had spread up his neck and across his chest. Dawn came, and still Cole rode. Ben was barely conscious now, mumbling deliriously about monsters and smoke and a goddess that bled green light. Cole talked to him constantly, trying to keep him anchored to the world. He told stories about Silver Creek, about the people there, about the future they would build now that the Rattlesnake brides were gone. But even as he spoke, Cole knew. The poison was too strong. They were still a full day from Silver Creek. Ben would not make it. The young deputy who had shown such courage, who had risked everything to save his town, would die in the desert just miles from home. Ben opened his eyes one last time as the sun reached its peak. He looked at Cole and smiled weakly. He said they had won. That was what mattered. Silver Creek was safe. The Rattlesnake brides were gone. His death meant something. Then his eyes closed and he stopped breathing. Cole pulled the horses to a stop and sat there for a long moment, holding Ben's body. Another good man dead. Another victim of the creatures that had plagued these lands for too long. Cole buried Ben on a hillside with a view of the desert. He marked the grave with stones and said a prayer. Then he rode on alone, carrying the news of their victory and the weight of all the deaths that victory had cost. He reached Silver Creek 2 days later. The townspeople rushed out to meet him, and their joy at seeing him alive quickly turned to grief when they realized Ben was not with him. Cole told them everything. About the deep canyon. About the destruction of the Rattlesnake brides and Ben's sacrifice. The whole town mourned. But they also celebrated, because the threat was gone. Over the following days and weeks, travelers began reporting that the Badlands felt different. Less menacing. The places that had been avoided for generations were suddenly safe to cross. No one heard the eerie singing anymore. No more bones were found arranged in mysterious circles. The Rattlesnake brides had been erased from the world. Cole stayed on as sheriff for another 10 years. He never forgot Ben Carter, or Frank Booth, or any of the others who had died fighting the creatures. He made sure their stories were remembered, written down, passed on, because the world needed to know that monsters were real, and that ordinary people, armed with courage and determination, could defeat even the most ancient evils. Silver Creek prospered. The mail route reopened. Ranchers expanded into areas that had been too dangerous before. The town grew and thrived. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew from the east, Cole would sometimes stand at the edge of town and look toward the Badlands. He would remember the deep canyon and the white smoke and the screaming of dying monsters, and he would think about the price of victory, about the men and women who had given everything to protect their home. Maria Gonzalez lived another 20 years. She taught others her grandmother's knowledge, making sure the old protections were not forgotten. Because even though the Rattlesnake brides were gone, she knew the desert was vast, and there might be other things lurking in its depths. Other ancient horrors waiting to be discovered. Cole eventually retired and spent his final years writing a book about his experiences. No one believed him at first. They thought it was fiction, a Wild West tall tale. But he knew the truth, and he wanted future generations to know it too. The Rattlesnake brides had been real. They had killed dozens, maybe hundreds, of people over the centuries. And they had been destroyed by ordinary men and women who refused to surrender to fear. The last entry in Cole's journal, written just weeks before his death, contained a warning. He wrote that the world was older and stranger than most people realized. There were things in the dark places that defied explanation, and while the Rattlesnake brides were gone, their legend served as a reminder. Evil existed. It took many forms, and the only way to defeat it was through courage, sacrifice, and a determination to protect those who could not protect themselves. Silver Creek still stands today, though few people remember its dark history. The cemetery on the hillside contains the graves of all those who died in the war against the Rattlesnake brides. Visitors sometimes comment on how many graves are dated to the same few months in that long-ago year. They wonder what tragedy befell the town. But the current residents just shake their heads and say it was a hard time. They do not mention monsters or ancient goddesses or canyons that dropped into hell itself, because some stories are too strange to believe, and some truths are too terrible to speak aloud. But on quiet nights, when the wind blows from the east, the oldest residents of Silver Creek will sometimes look toward the Badlands, and they will remember. And they will be grateful that whatever once lived in those rocks is gone, destroyed by men who were brave enough to face the darkness and strong enough to survive it. The deep canyon itself was never found again. Cole tried to lead others there, to prove his story was true, but the path had vanished. The canyon had either collapsed entirely or hidden itself away. The Badlands kept their secrets, and perhaps that was for the best. Some places should remain lost. Some doors should stay closed. The Rattlesnake brides were gone, destroyed at their source, and that was enough.